Hello, hello, hello. All right, so we're going to talk about magic tricks today. Not really magic tricks, more like magic tools. This is from the field of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. If you've noticed, I use that in my work and in my coaching. And if you're looking for coaching, get in touch. But how do you build trust with the inner self? Right? Because the problem is that even when we use the word inner self, I think still people, at least conversations I've had, really still struggle with connecting with the inner self because they tend to tie it with, for example, theological concepts like God, which is God tends to be historically and theologically and ideologically tends to be a being outside of you. So, you know, with the inner self or God or love or source or, you know, beauty, whatever it is that you tie up with this being inside of you, you're not separate from it. But the problem is we feel separate from it, right? And what does Neville say? Feeling is the secret, which means, you know, you're going to find out what you believe about your connection to this source, to this inner self, when you go to manifest something. Because if you feel like, oh, this is impossible, then you don't trust it, right? And there's this really cool kind of idea that Neville really puts out there. I believe it's in Out of This World. And he essentially says this, and I'm paraphrasing, is that you have to walk around in this world as if you have an ace in your back pocket, which means you're always prepared. You're always protected. You're always safe. You're always loved. You're always celebrated, right? Life is always good, right? Cars always work. Bills are always paid, right? You're always in a loving relationship. You know, the clients that you serve are always blessed. Whatever it is, you walk around with that as if it's already there. You already have it. People don't need to know about it. You yourself know about it. And that's more than enough, right? And that's what he's really saying. And there's loads of verses about that as well. There's one particular one that I think is extremely important, and it's connected to this one, and it just says honor God. But I think it's an extremely powerful verse because when you understand the word honor, it's our word for cite, C-I-T-E, as in citation or a bibliography, right? You know, those annoying things that you have to do when you're in college, and they're like, hey, you spend 7 hours on doing a bibliography, right? And, you know, I never enjoyed them. But like basically, when you're writing them, what are you doing? It's not about necessarily only building authority. It's saying, hey, everything is from here. Everything is from here, right? So it's like beautiful life. Oh, I cite imagination. Oh, fears about losing money. Oh, I cite imagination. So the good or the bad, it doesn't matter. Everything is bibliographically done in the imagination. So when it says honor God or the imagination, that's what it's saying. It's saying give all of your awareness, or not even awareness, but almost kind of like the accolades, right, to the imagination. Whether you're manifesting good or bad, your bibliography is going to say imagination, right? And right after whatever you've experienced, right? If it's like, I won the lottery, boom, imagination, right? So that's the bibliography. That's your mental or psychological bibliography. Because you're giving that, I guess it is awareness. Like awareness to the fact that you're doing everything in imagination, right? And that's how you build trust as well. So that's why it's very important that you also work on not just big desires, but small desires, right? Meaning things that aren't as hard. And I don't really like the idea of big and small because your brain really will create distance between you and this desire. When really winning the lottery is the same as manifesting a new pair of socks, right? Whatever it is, there is no delineation. That delineation is you giving that meaning, okay? So when we're trying to fully grasp what it means to trust, we have to understand that the imagination has certain descriptors, ways of understanding it, right? Ideas, terms, labels. And so one is power, right? The scripture calls it the wisdom and power of God, right? Which is Jesus Christ and so on and so forth, which is your imagination. And the reason why that's important is that you build trust by embodying it. Okay, you build trust not just by saying, oh, well, that's a cool concept, but what is power? Oh, that's a great idea, but what is wisdom? How do you define it? Okay, so it's important that you do define it because the way I define it is going to be different to how you define it. Okay, and it's important that you obviously define everything in the positive, of course, but when you're trying to grasp what it means to trust, it means you're building a bond, a relationship with the inner self. That means like anybody else, because Neville says the inner self is a person, right? You spend time with it, right? You know, in the kind of like theological world, it's just having quiet time, or it's having Bible study, or whatever you want to call it. It's spending time with the inner self. And yes, and what I'm saying is, here's your first tip. Like set up a daily routine to spend time just with the inner self. Not even necessarily manifesting, but imagine it to be a person, right? And what would you do with this person? How would you spend time with them? Would it be in like reading the Bible? Would it be reading the Torah? Would it be reading the Quran? Would it be reading Paulo Coelho? It doesn't matter what it would be, right? How would you spend time with the inner self? Would it just be sitting in silence? Would it be meditating without expectation? Whatever it is that you define it, it's spending time with it. And that's one thing I don't see almost anybody really encouraging in the typical sense. We're just like, oh, just use it to get, which is a very consumer model, right? And it's really against the idea of understanding that you're supposed to have relationship, not transactional relationship, meaning your imagination should not just be treated as some vending machine, right? It should be like, hey, we're friends, we're buddies, we're pals, right? I rely on you. That's what Neville means when he says, walk in the world as if you have this ace in your back pocket, okay? Because you are then going through like, okay, there's a bond here, there's a relationship. And that's how you build trust. You spend time with it, right? But then here's a couple techniques from NLP. Okay, it's called visual audio kinesthetic. All right, and this is really just a simple technique, and you can Google it on even a more detailed breakdown than I'm going to give here. And obviously, I do give a more detailed breakdown in my coaching, so definitely get in touch. But visual and audio and kinesthetic are what they sound like. There's a visual component, which means seeing but also interpreting. There's an audio, which means you're hearing but also interpreting. There's a kinesthetic. I'm acting and I'm physically doing something, right, in the world, but I'm also interpreting by and through my actions. All right. So what you're doing is you're asking, okay, as a person who trusts the inner self, let me just say it in a very cheesy way, that you trust yourself, right? And so how do you do that? Well, ask, what would it be like visually in an audio? What would you hear, right? About how you trust the inner self. How would you talk? Well, what things would you be saying? And NLP speak, that means you're modal operators. How are you talking about your relationship with the inner self? Is it like, oh my gosh, like I can never feel closest and everything I'm doing isn't working and so on and so forth? Well, then guess what? You're not going to feel close to the inner self. But everything I do is working. I manifest so easily. Manifestations come to me all the time. I am such a magic like man. I am just awesome, right? And you create these kind of rampages where you like go off and you're like, okay, man, I am in love with the inner self. I'm in love with myself, right? And so that is ultimately what you want to do. And so what you do is, what would this person see? That's the visual. There's the audio. What would this person hear? How would they see the world from this perspective of, I know that imagination creates reality. I'm citing it, right? I'm honoring it, okay? And so I'm living as if I know this, okay? And so how would they move in the world? That's the kinesthetic, right? How would they move in the stage world? We keep calling it the stage world. We keep calling it 3D. I just say, just call it the world. It doesn't matter. You need to create some separation unless you need that separation to feel more confident, okay? And so, again, audio, what would they hear? How would they hear things, right? And then there's also future pacing. So future pacing is another technique, okay? Now, future pacing is extremely powerful. And again, it's probably more popular or popularly known as like the future self, using the whole future self, but you are using it. So you're saying, oh, the future self is already in love with the inner self. The future self is already powerful. The future self is already known by its relationship with imagination, right? It already manifested everything that it wanted, and so on and so forth. And so now you're asking, but not just asking from your current perspective, you're asking from the future perspective, and then you're actually building out strategies and plans and goals to actually not only spend time with the inner self, but to test the inner self, right? I mean, Neville says, we've got to test this. And so again, you're doing it from the future perspective, always. Right? And that's, like, by the way, you want a tip on how to live life through Neville Goddard's work through manifestation is always through the future self. What would the future self do? Oh, you're scared about going for this job interview? What would the future self do? Probably not give a rip, right? And so you're feeling lonely, but you want to feel loved. Okay, what would the future self do? Oh, they would feel loved, right? And so you're constantly looking and feeling and believing and receiving and physically acting in this world only from the future self. And so you begin future pacing, which means you look back from then to now. So if you want to have the best year ever, like, right, and you're like looking at your watch and it's like December 25th and 2024, and you're like, I had the best year ever. How would that person not only just see you now, but how would they start making steps from that? Or how would they have made steps, right? Begin thinking like that.